Hello everyone and welcome to the Xenogenesis podcast. My name's Richard Acton. This episode 19, we're covering chapters 1 and 2 from part 4 Training Ground of Book 1 Dawn of Octavia Butler's Xenogenesis trilogy. I'm joined as always in this jungle by my co-host
Michael Glinka. Hi everyone. I mean, just this was your intro was just asking for me to sing "Welcome to the Jungle," but it took everything in me to not to do it.
Oh dear. Yeah. Well, yes. We're in the jungle this time, right? Or in the simulated jungle.
Yeah.
Apparently, a very realistically simulated jungle.
Yeah, it seems like to be completely like, you know, with everything. Like it's perfect. It's so. I think in those two chapters, it's so perfectly mimicking it that people are still not believing that they are on a ship.
Which is impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. To be honest, in the book they were describing about like, you know, clouds and everything, like the environment, you know, they had to like really, the Oankali really did great job on like manipulating the environment to mimic, you know, cloud making. You know, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I say having something that, I mean, either being like a large enough space that can actually have like a microclimate, or having some other way of simulating the weather.
The ship is basically farting clouds.
Yeah, and also, I mean, just having a convincing sky. That's a pretty big. Yeah, that's difficult. Man, there's some SFX guys are like impressed.
Can you imagine like if it's like it's like the guy who has to paint Golden Bridge, like that they have to paint it, and once they finish they have to start again, because by the time they finish it takes like them, I don't know, 3 years or something. They have to just start again. Same in here, like there's one on Kali that basically nobody likes and just goes painting the sky because, you know, it's by the time he finishes, gets the end, he needs to start again.
Nah, they probably just, you know, talk to the ship and it does it.
I would do that. I would be like, nobody, like, just, yeah, you go paint that, and it'll take you like several years, and you start again.
Got one of those fancy, what do they call it? The new sets that Disney's been using with like the screen behind. So instead of doing green screen, they have like a giant screen in the background. They've been doing this for the Mandalorian and a bunch of their new stuff. It's I forgot what it's called.
What do you mean? Like no, you said not green screen, so it's something else.
They have like a panoramic projection of the background they want in the shot, and they just shoot in that space.
Oh, really? Wow, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
I need to look into that then, because I guess it makes sense that probably some of the scenes were recorded in some like in house, but I thought it was like mostly, if anything, a green screen, but.
Yeah, I think that's how they give it kind of, and it hasn't a sort of added verisimilitude that you don't really get from green screen. There's a certain depth to it, especially as they do a lot of physical effects. But, yeah.
Okay.
Now we're getting sidetracked.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even start really getting sidetracked. Yes, let's go back.
Yeah. So let's do your predictions.
Sure.
For the first chapter of the new part.
Sure. So I have chapter 1 prediction was that we are back into the training room, and where Lilith have spent her, I think, like around a year of her life and before. And I think that in first chapter it will just sort of walk us through the plan, like what plans, the things that Oankali are planning to teach the humans, and sort of like the discussion of like, you know, they'll still think they're like on Earth. They'll try to escape. So this sort of like, you know, planning and conversation, I guess, either between humans or maybe Lilith and Nikand or something. So,
Okay. We didn't get much by way of humans planning just yet.
No, not yet.
More scene setting.
Yeah, I guess
before we get into that.
Yeah. It probably will take a while, because this chapter was mostly about the discussion between Lilith and Nikand on the whole idea of them. I think like Lilith predicting that they might actually try escape. But anyway, let's get to it, I guess.
Yeah, let's start in on the summary.
Sure. So chapter 1 summary. So we start with a description of the training area, a contained environment mimicking the tropical conditions on Earth. The book describing it as like area full of lush greens, like trees and bushes, flowing rivers, various flora and fauna with a blue sky, as we said before, with clouds above. Liv also says, there's some few flowers around, but it's basically all green everywhere. And just a side note, Lilith said during her first thing that she was told during the training was never to lean against the trees. And here immediately I thought like a few examples of like potential things that actually trees present on Earth that basically if you do that you can get yourself hurt quite badly, in fact. And I think probably the most famous example here is the Mandalorian tree that basically it basically if you go underneath it and it's nice and sunny, it like releases the vapor from it will like poison you. If it's raining, it will poison you. If you set it on fire, it will poison you like times 10. If it's like, honestly, the sap of it is like super toxic, and it like produces these little tiny green apples, and you think about eating one, I mean that's basically is like bye-bye for you. So it's like evolution went crazy on this tree, just said like, you know what, I'm gonna make an asshole tree.
Rainforests are pretty crazy ecosystems, right? There's a bunch of
so incredible, like honestly,
bunch of crazy chemical warfare going on.
It literally is chemical warfare, so really well described, very good, spot on description of what's going on in there. Luckily, apparently, that tree is not that common.
Gladly.
Because I mean, honestly, you can't really get rid of it in any way.
Yeah, that'd be difficult. For not leaning against them, there's a few other ones that are just like, spiny in a impressively spiny fashion.
Yeah. I mean, in general, like I guess I remember watching a documentary basically saying that for example, if you're walking through a jungle, you should never step on top of like fallen trees because they may look sturdy, but like you have to be careful because they might be actually really rotten, and if your foot goes down, it can you can hurt yourself, and then infection go through because it's like all the bacteria and everything just festering in it, and then basically you'll get infection in your wound and then die basically.
Yeah, well, it's before antibiotics, infections were seriously dangerous. Right?
Yeah.
And the first guy they ever treated with penicillin was in hospital with a serious infection because he was pricked by a rose.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
He had a rose prick, and he was dying of this infection that had resulted from it. And actually, he still died because they didn't have enough penicillin to finish the course of treatment. But it was the first like successful demonstration of penicillin was in this guy. And it was only partially successful.
Damn. Wow. Finally, like, a innovation of the, of humanity coming up with my first antibiotic and then not working because not enough dose.
Yeah. But back in the early days, they had a lot of difficulty producing the stuff. Yeah. It was the trouble. It was very inefficient. They went to the Americans and used a bunch of some kind of corn derivative, I can't remember, to like grow a bunch of it in vats.
I see. The penicillin mold, you mean, and then just extract the compound out of it.
Yeah, I mean, they started out like growing it in some less efficient growth medium in like bed pans and sort of like skimming it off the top, and they kind of eventually figured out how to industrialize the process in collaboration with some American firms.
I see.
Yeah.
It's really interesting how, the progress, start with like, a petri dish, and then you go like, sort of like beds or whatever, and then suddenly like you have vats of it being produced, mass produced.
Yeah, the scaling up was a big deal.
Yeah. But I need to say, I just had this random thought that tank, that vat where the penicillin is made, must be probably the most sterile vat in existence. Like basically nothing can grow on it unless somebody introduces some antibiotic resistant bacteria, but it has to be super like, mwah. You can touch it, be like, yeah, it doesn't matter because it's all penicillin.
Yeah, I expect so. I mean, they have to be super sterile all the time with those bioreactor things, right? Because there's always something that will grow in there and eat whatever it is you're trying to grow and screw things up.
Oh yeah. Hold on, isn't there like I don't know? I heard the news recently about like the NASA spiders, like the spiders that are in the this in space, the one on the what's the name of the
on the ISS?
Yeah, on the ISS, apparently figure out how to make space webs. And I don't know if it's like they brought them purposely or if it's some random spiders that just basically managed to sneak in and they just
I
started...
assume they brought them on purpose.
It feels to me like I didn't manage to read the article and I assumed the same. But at the same time, if there's actually a spider sneaking onto the shuttle and then surviving the journey and then just making a spider web in there, that for me is just incredible.
I went to bed last night and there was a spider on my covers.
Just waiting for you to be like, Richard, come here. I'll hug you I'll tuck you into bed to sleep.
So I removed it out to the outside.
Oh, how could you? You could have like a nice companion to sleep.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to have them here to eat the bugs, but not if they're going to be in my bed. Thank you very much.
And then accidentally walk into your mouth and you just... and, tasty. Protein.
Yeah.
Right, and on that note...
Apparently, grilled tarantula is very nice.
All those things like a scorpion in chocolate, grilled tarantula, all those things are really cool, but I don't think I would ever want to eat it.
So the way they eat grilled tarantula, though, is they don't... Like, the thing that bugs me is eating them whole with all the chitinous exoskeleton stuff. Don't know about that. But they crack open the limbs on the tarantula and eat the white meat from inside.
Okay.
I'm a vegetarian, so I probably wouldn't be big on it anyway. But like, if I was going to be eating arachnids, if I was going to be eating something in the arthropod group, I'd be okay with that, more or less.
No.
It's not that different from, lobsters.
I don't know. I'm really conflicted in here. Honestly, I mean, I had lobsters before and I was like, yeah, that's cool. But like a tarantula, I mean, do you know, those legs are so hairy. I mean, their body's like so hairy, prickly hair. Like, some of the tarantulas use those hairs as like defense mechanisms. They're like spread them and it's like like it stings you, right? I just cannot imagine having that in my mouth. It's like eating a cactus or something.
Yeah, I could see that not being great.
So I'm just
I like tarantulas. I think they're cute.
Yeah, I think there's like interesting animal to like a lot of people like find it, and I guess like they're really when they get used to it and they walk on your hands, like it's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean it's still like it's a massive animal that basically looks like if you increase its size by 10 times, I would be scared to like.
Oh yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. But I mean, you'd be scared of a 10x dog, right?
I mean, anything that's bigger than above knees is scary. So.
Yeah, we got sidetracked again.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my god, this episode's doing great. Like first 15 minutes and we're already so sidetracked.
Right. Back to the summary.
Back to the future. We are told then that the undergrowth was like thin in this whole environment, that you could traverse it without any problems except near the rivers, where in some places a machete would be necessary, but that was not permitted. Any tools were not permitted yet. And we're told, Xenogenesis tells that because before any tools will be given, the humans need to get used to the environment. And this is where the book goes. It hesitated. Let them settle more firmly into their places with their uloi. They can tolerate one another now. Let them learn that it isn't shameful to be together with one another and with us. And the scene then changes to riverbank with few fallen trees, and a conversation between Lilith and Nikan strikes about the fact that some humans will cut the trees down and build boats to because they continue thinking they're on Earth. But Nikan summarizes it by saying simply that there is no way out for them except the way we offer: to learn to feed and shelter themselves in this environment, to become self-sustaining. When they've done that, we'll take them to the Earth and let them go. But it feels like Lilith feels like that Nikanj knows that humans will try to escape, but yet it's still talked about mixed human Oankali settlements with mixed children, in them, and yeah, and it feels to me that the whole idea is, personally, I feel like it's really, I don't know, wishful thinking in some way, especially what we, all this like situations so far in the cell.
Yeah. I mean, although, to be honest, it seems like it's kind of an inevitability, right? They might lose a few along the way, but eventually they'll get some people who'll go along with this, because it's like they seem willing to just kind of, lose a few people here and there.
Yeah, I mean, although you say that, this is what sort of like, is it here maybe, or maybe it's the next chapter? They talk about like, it's more, they don't want to lose them because how little of them there are in terms of humans, the amount of humans after the whole like nuclear war. So
yeah, that is it's kind of a weird paradoxical state there, or contradictory state there, because they do seem that they seem sort of genuinely upset when they lose humans, but they also are very determined to have things go exactly this way, and seem to be willing to kind of deal with some losses to achieve their goal.
Yeah,
so it's kind of
it's a bit
contradiction.
weird. Yeah, and I feel like it's, considering they have so much like skill in genetics, they could easily do in vitro fertilization of like some collected oocytes, and then just basically generate their own humans for themselves.
I suppose it's a population genetics thing, right? They want enough variability left.
Yeah. And also, it said that Nikanj, actually, I think it was Nikanj or Chtaya earlier, that it's about also their culture and them as beings, like self-aware beings that they are really attracted to as well.
Yeah, although that doesn't really seem to square with the way that
They
they've
behave,
handled, like the denying them access to the documents of their history, and kind of placing them in environments where they really wouldn't be able to recapitulate any of their original culture.
Yeah. So, yeah, I agree. We had this conversation many times before, and I this point is always out there.
Yeah, weird contradiction.
Yeah, it's really weird, and they insist on those ways as well, how to do it this ways. But anyway, so we learned that the Oankali-human bonding has now subsidized, so it's like it's calmed down, and humans tolerate again one another. But sort of Lilith's like internally, we didn't want to go back to them yet. Although it says that very little drugging was taking place. People like Curt and Gabriel were still under influence to let them slowly acclimatize, but apparently they were resisting conditioning. The question is whether they were strong or just unable to adapt. And Nikanj prompts Lilith to come back to the rest of the humans, but as Lilith finds, there's a little scene where basically Lilith finds a liana root to sit on, and then she asks him what will happen to humans that can't adapt, and Nikanj tells her that if they're not violent, they'll be taken to Earth with them. And it's a bit the chapter is a bit like jumping around, but basically what happens then is that Nikanj comes around to the buttress, the tree, destroying her sense of solitude and home. This is what the book says. Nothing that looked and moved as Nikanj did could come from home. She got up early and walked with it. Have the ants bitten you? It asked. And apparently Nikanj did not like Lilith hide small injuries. Her health was very much like its business, and it would inspect her body to check for any bites to heal her. But Lilith would prefer that the simulation did not have insects such as mosquitoes' presence, which I personally agree. But the Oankali insisted
Yes.
on it. So,
So, yeah, this is an interesting. It's a bit of a parallel to the situation on Earth, right? Mosquitoes.
everybody hates them.
We'd rather not have them.
Yes. It's one thing that can be eliminated. But yeah, this sort of chapter jumps between the description of the environment. It may be some confusing when I talk about it, but like it jumps between a bit the description of the environment, the Lilith doing something, and the conversation between Nikanj and Lilith just taking place in between. So apologies for that, but it basically what's going on. They're talking about the humans while sort of there's the description of the environment.
Okay. And yeah, so I think that it's kind of worth noting on the fact that they insist on having all these bugs and things present in the simulation may be relevant, right? I mean, I don't know if mosquitoes in particular have any merit whatsoever.
None, zero, absolutely null.
Yeah, let's CRISPR gene drive those guys out of existence, I think.
Yes.
It's goodbye, mosquitoes. But there's a cool example of this from the Brazil nut tree.
Mm-hmm.
So the Brazil nut tree requires like several other species in order for it to continue to exist.
Uh-huh.
So it's a sort of illustration of how interconnected the ecologies are.
Yes.
Right, so the Brazil tree needs a little mammal that looks kind of like a cross between a rat and a squirrel with like big buck front teeth like a beaver. It's called an agouti. They need that to break into the shells that contain the Brazil nuts.
Okay.
Because basically nothing else will chew through them.
Oh, wow, okay.
Maybe some monkeys might break them with a rock, but that's pretty much the only way they get out of the pods is if the agouti eats them and ends up planting some of the Brazil nuts. So they need the agouti, otherwise the seeds basically don't get out. But also, in order to be pollinated, they need one of a very small number of bee species. And like the main pollinator for the Brazil nut tree, I forget which way around it is, but one of the sexes pollinates the Brazil tree, and the other one pollinates I forget if it's a bromeliad or an orchid, but there's a particular species of flower that lives in the canopy.
Okay.
That they need that, I think, I can't remember if it's for food or to reproduce, but so in order for the bees to pollinate the tree, they need the flower. And in order for the tree to have its seeds, they need the agouti. So you've got all four of these species in this kind of, like, they all need
Symbiotic
one another in order to continue to, yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's always like this when you try to do something to the environment, like to get rid of one thing, and suddenly the environment gets overwhelmed with other like parts of it. Like it is perfect example, like for example Yellowstone Park, when they introduced the wolves, right? Like I think in year 2000 back again into the park, and suddenly like the number of species, the number of mooses, I think, or deer populations dropped down dramatically. That meant that like the trees on the riverbanks could grow back again, right? Because there was not so much grazing on them. That also meant that species like beavers came back, and then lots of birds that haven't been seen them for decades. And it just basically the ecology sort of balanced each other just by introducing several wolves back into the system.
Yeah, so all these species have these kind of very thoroughly well adapted little niches into which they fit, and if you take any of them out, then it starts to really perturb the network. It's pretty. So I can see why, in this context, they'd insist on having all the things.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, and I mean the other, for example, influence of like removing like against removing species is like, I mean, the famous Chinese hunger, where basically what happened was the little sparrows were eating the seeds from the like wheat or whatever.
Oh, yes.
And
Yeah.
basically there was a massive hunt on them, and literally the next year the biggest locust like wave
Plague,
like
swarm.
basically
Yeah.
went through the whole and just basically destroy like, I don't know, 70, 80 or maybe 90% of all the crops, and like it caused millions of die out of hunger. It's like this is example of things like when you try to fix one problem and then it just basically comes back at you with like a hammer and punches you in the face with it.
Yep. No, you want to be careful of monocultures.
Yeah.
Because you get, I mean, there's so many examples of this, like the Cavendish banana.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was. Where it's like a clonal banana. All the bananas were this one, like, very genetically similar banana. And then it got a disease and it killed, like, all the bananas. We had to switch.
Yeah, isn't there now another fungus that only affects the Cavendish banana, and then basically if it continues spreading, basically by, I don't know, the next 50 years, I think our children will not know what banana is, basically, or at least the one we used to know.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I think the Cavendish is basically already dead. Like you can't cultivate it because it just gets nobbled by whatever this thing is, and then I don't know if the new strains they're using have the same problem. But
I think I think I heard something about it, and I think it might be actually affecting other strains as well. But yeah, it's basically, we may soon say goodbye to bananas because of it.
Yep, that's why you need genetic diversity.
It's pretty crazy. Like, it's how a bit of, I mean, there's some things that humans have cultivated for generations and it seemed to be fine, but like some things we just take over way too far, and it just pushes it over the limit.
Yep.
But anyway.
So, just returning to a couple of the other points in this. So, what do you think of the situation with Curt and Gabriel? So they seem to be being weaned off this drug.
Well,
but
there's still
an interesting point there of just saying, are they strong or are they unable to adapt?
I think in terms of Curt is just unable to adapt. That guy is just basically way too stubborn for anything. But I think this is a good question, but I think it gets answered next in the next chapter.
Okay.
I think Gabriel himself actually explains why they're so resisting this whole situation.
Okay.
So I think I would wait to answer this question until a bit later.
I wonder what would happen if they did make a canoe and tried to row down this river.
I just imagine like being a escalator or a conveyor belt, just like swimming down of it, and then suddenly just like bump hit the wall, and then you're like, where the river goes, and the river just basically like just goes down in the hole and then just goes back again, from the other side of the room.
Yeah, like one of those swimming pool things that's like a treadmill. It's just flow.
Yes, basically.
Yeah.
So I just feel like that's basically what's gonna happen. Like punk. It's like, oh,
yeah,
the touch is just like basically the Truman Show.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. Like, this is basically the Truman Show.
Yeah, this is very Truman Show-esque, actually. Yeah.
So they're gonna have a lot of surprises when they're trying. Is like, when they try to escape and they end up basically in this like a perfect dome that encloses them.
Okay.
So the conversation about the humans continues as I mentioned. Nikan says, "There are so few of you. No one wants to give up on any of you." She had to think back to realize what it was talking about. Some of us thought we should hold off bonding with you until you were brought here, it told her. Here, it would have been easier for you to band together, become a family. And this is where I agree, because like this whole idea that they should be allowed to get accustomed in this tropical rainforest instead of the cage But they now do see the positive of the cage, because at least they had the opportunity to see the aliens first, and then but above the point.
Yeah, well, I suppose it is also. It would have been less dangerous in just like a physical environment sense to do this in a room that's relatively controlled than like if they freak out and run away from the Oankali in the jungle, they could hurt themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some positives of this whole idea, but I think like if the room had at least something to do, that would, I think, change a lot of things. But I think we've discussed this over and over again, that basically just closing people in a small environment for prolonged period of time is just asking for problems with nothing to do.
Yeah. Taking the slightly longer game in the jungle environment, getting them sort of willing to come up and interact with the Oankali on their own terms might have been a bit more productive, I guess, in the long run.
I guess so. Like tribes meeting, basically, us and them, and exchange of gifts or something and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's got a much less coercive overtone than the way they did it in the room, right? They're not coming in and drugging everyone and kind of forcing everyone's hands, but rather if they had a group of humans in this forest thing and they just sort of came up to them, and did like we said, exchange of gifts, kind of a bit like the way human tribes might have interacted with one another, right?
Yeah.
Have that kind of sense of equality, right? A sense of choice.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think you'd. It would certainly take longer that way.
Yeah, I mean, it would take much longer to deal with the whole situation, getting them accustomed to the Oankali. But this is
and you'd have the issue of like if they wanted to seduce the humans the way they seem to have done, they would have probably had more issues with like humans putting stigma on one another.
Yes.
For engaging with the Oankali, whereas this way they've all been subject to it, so they can't judge
each other. And yeah. No, this is the thing. Like the question about this is the thing, right? This is the answer why they did the way they did. It's because the chapter literally ends with Nikan simply stating to Lilith that some of the Oankali couldn't wait, and maybe it'd be better for the Oankali and humans if the Oankali were not so strongly drawn to humans. I guess that sort of attraction to the genetic variation and the genetic code of the humans is so attractive for them that basically they just couldn't stop themselves doing the way they did it.
Yep, they've gotten a bit too impatient.
Yes. Which is interesting, because it's finally one of the other characteristics we find it like a sort of a negative characteristic of the Oankali, that they are making mistakes. Like Lilith was trying to catch them on a lie or some mistake. But over the period we've seen, the Peter's Uloi not noticing that Peter is doing what it was doing, and then basically Peter dying. The whole cage situation. The idea of them being so attracted to humans that basically they're so impatient that basically the main situation with Lilith and Paul Titus.
Yes, it's very sort of uncharacteristic for them to be impatient as well. Right?
Yeah, I mean, there were
Lilith was kind of in awe of their like willingness to just outweight her on just about anything.
Exactly.
And yet here they're kind of, we couldn't wait.
Yeah, it sounds very contradictory to what initially they were described as, I guess. Which
I think it's probably, humans, we're a very contradictory bunch as well, right? Just probably in a slightly different way to the Oankali. So I think it kind of gives them, it builds that sort of xenomind thing, right? They have their own set of difficult to understand contradictory motivations.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. I think it's very I would say maybe it's more of like similar to humans, but more in an extreme way, if you think about it. Because when they were dealing with, for example, Chitaya and Lilith, right? And the other humans. Like there was only one human that could outpatient the Oankali. As you know, I think it was Leah.
Wasn't Gabriel? He was...
No, Gabriel was described as an actor. There was one lady that was basically described as so patient, like not saying anything.
Oh yeah.
That basically the Oankali just gave up because they couldn't just. She outpatient them.
Yeah, although Gabriel had kind of a different. They never figured out like who was the real him.
Yes, because
he was playing his parts.
Yes.
So he kind of outweighted them in the sense of he played a bunch of different roles until they gave up trying to figure him out.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right here as well. So I think in terms of like they may be like an extreme beings, but at the same time they do have similar flaws to what humans have. But they just try to think that they're not as flawed, I would guess.
Yep. Which is also very human.
Yes, which is also very human. In this chapter, like sort of, next chapter sort of talks about the whole idea of why it's going to be a problem. That they think so much that about it, like they think that they know what they're talking about, but the reality they don't. But anyway, should we go to the chapter 2 prediction?
Yeah, let's move on to chapter 2.
So I think this is so now Lilith and Nikanj talk about the humans and what the problems were, and Nikanj explain the stuff. So I think this is the chapter 2 is going to be back to the back again with the humans, right? The whole idea, sort of the issue with of Curt and Gabriel arises, and there might be some resistance or trying to split away. I thought that maybe like some initial steps of like resistance forming, basically.
Okay. Yeah. You're still big on this. There will be a resistance.
Oh yeah, 100%. If they're gonna break away, because they're 100% gonna like literally Lilith, Nikanj, they're all gonna try to break away and may build their boats or whatever. And they will find the long-term prediction is basically they will find the edge of the room and be like, oh no, this is the Truman Show. And they'll be like, oh, okay. And basically they realize that they're actually in fact trapped. And that will, some of them will just give up on this whole idea and accept their fate. But some people, and like Curt, I guess they're just so stubborn against it that basically they'll just become more and more aggressive and resistant to everything. But anyway, that's a longer prediction. We know that's for later. Let's go back to chapter 2 summary.
Yep.
So we start with the chapter with like the tools being finally handed out. Things like waterproof tarpaulins, machetes, axes, shovels, hose, metal pots, ropes, hammocks, baskets, and mats. And Lilith spoke privately with each of the most dangerous humans before they were given their tools.
Yeah, so some of these guys, I don't know if giving them axes, machetes.
Yeah, it's like don't do something stupid, I guess. This is what, like, for example, happens. What the first example we're given is Lilith talking to Curt. So we are told that actually Curt and Gabriel are finally off the drugs. So they're on their full sort of like normal, sort of back to the original mental state. And this is where where Lilith goes to Curt and starts to talk to him, is on the fact that he is needed. That's why she, when they go to the under, that's why she woke him up, and they need him to survive, and it's better for him not to go Peter's way. But the only response she gets from him is just him staring at her without even saying anything. It's like, the guy.
I'm gonna set up a communal thing where we keep the axes of the machetes, and there's going to be a sign-out sheet, and no one's allowed to take the axes of the machetes unless everyone knows.
Lockout. Yeah, basically a safety lock.
Yeah.
I just I guess like, isn't it like a very common trope in novels that, you know, in stories in general, that like you do something like that, right? You lock those things away because you know that some people in your environment are just not to be trusted with them. One, either from their stupidity, or two, because something is wrong with them. And then you, at some point, the main characters just go, you know, okay, you've been a good boy for a while. I will give you an axe. Go chop some of the wood. And then you end up with the guy missing with an axe in his hand, and basically suddenly people, you know, disappearing with like their heads appearing somewhere in, you know, random places. It's like, you can try that, but if there's something wrong with those people, and you know, like, it's something's gonna happen. It feels like this in here. That
yeah, it's one of those apocalypse now deals, right? There's always somebody who goes nuts.
exactly. It's just at this point, I think, like, maybe not at this point, but when like some of those guys realize that they're actually trapped on a spaceship, it's going to hit them hard, and it's either gonna like break their souls, right? Or it's gonna fuel their rage, and they're just gonna go on full on rampage. Just basically, you know, everyone is in open season.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how they react when they actually figure that out.
Yeah, I'm scared, to be honest. Like, I genuinely am. Like, I'm curious, and I know that's like stuff's gonna go down. I just wonder what will happen. You know, like if it's gonna be a human to go down first, or an Oankali.
Yeah, I said it seems like the reality of the simulation kind of environment they're in. It's got to be very impressive. In that, I mean, you'd think that they get a bit suspicious about the degree to which they're kind of constrained in a certain locality, right? There's like river and thick underbrush kind of limiting how far they can get. And I think I'd start to be a bit skeptical about the reality of the situation.
Well, I mean, if it's like
with certain constraints,
if it looks like, for example, you know, in the area where you are, let's call it starting area, right? And the environment around is like, you have some fruit bushes, you have some trees, you know, you do this, you know, everything is like in a quite controlled manner. And then, you know, you allow humans to go a bit of traveling. It's like, oh, there's a river. It's quite heavy bushes. We don't have the tools yet to go through those bushes without, you know, hurting ourselves. It's fun. It looks like a barrier. You give them machetes. Oh, now we have the method to get out of the you know, to chop the barrier down. There's the river.
Yep.
And then, like, you know, they will push that boundary more and more, but like at some,
it just seems very convenient.
Yes, it's like very convenient. Like, you know, it's like basically a progression in a game. You know, like you start in the starting area, easy level. You go to the river, it's a medium, and then you try to cross the river and go on the other side, which is like heavy bush or whatever, right? This is like the hard difficulty level area. Right?
Yeah, you swim to the middle of the river and you hit the world boundary, and it's just like an invisible wall.
Yeah, exactly. It's just basically an invisible wall, and it's just like, oh, okay, cool. That's not where I can go. And then you try basically squish yourself, you know, outside the boundary because, you know, because you want to.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm kind of, my suspicion is, why have they not like cottoned on to the fact that there are world boundaries and been like, you know, that's suspicious. But I mean, I can see how you would like delude yourself into not thinking it if you didn't want to believe it.
I mean, you know, I can imagine in their situation is that you are so preoccupied with the fact that you're finally so out, right? It feels like Earth. I would also be like, well, it's a jungle. What do you expect, right? You know, unless you literally like walk around and it's like a circle of like bushes and you're like, the river is encircling like in a perfect island. And you're like, oh, okay, this feels like, why is the river, you know, circulating in a perfect... So that was like, oh, okay, that makes sense that it's not... That feels like an actual barrier to prevent us to go anywhere. But if it's like, you know, like a room where basically you have a river going, you know, like splitting in like a delta, right? And basically you have, you know, you can try to go the other side. On the other side, you have like very thick bushes and trees. It feels more natural, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, I think it'd have to be pretty big.
Yes, it would have to be really big for it to feel
Convincing.
Yes. But then again, we know the ship is massive. And I guess it can grow as well. So I guess whatever room they prepared for the 40 or so humans, that room has to be pretty big to accommodate everyone.
Yeah. Actually, it occurred to me the other day that if they're using spin gravity in this spaceship, that since they've had water this whole time in the room, they could have checked to see if there was a Coriolis effect. Even if it's like a relatively small one, they might be able to pick up on it because they just set up a water droplet and kind of measure if it's deviating from a straight fall. Then they'd be able to figure out that there's spin gravity.
I mean, a way,
it doesn't prove anything if it's not there because it might just be a really small effect. But if it is,
yes, I agree. But at the same time, if you don't look, if it's so small, like depending on the size of the ship and how like the spin, how fast the spin, as you mentioned, maybe it's so negligible, also too small to like you'd have to actually measure it. But like because things like this usually would take some time to notice with a naked eye, right? And it depends of like how big is the ship. What if the ship is so massive it actually has its own core, let's say dense core, that basically allows it to go straight down, right? It just feels like
I'm not saying it would I'm not saying not finding the Coriolis effect would be like strong evidence that you weren't on a spaceship. But finding it in a measurable size would be strong evidence that you were.
Yes, I agree on that. I just think like that it would be difficult to initially, unless you are like, unless you thought about it beforehand. If somebody, you're on a spaceship. Oh, okay. If that's the case, what's the gravity? How's the gravity formed? Right? Is there sort of like a false sort of core sort of creating the false gravity that basically leads to that core? Or is it like a spinning? It's the idea would be there, but like to test them.
I mean, I don't know. I think it eventually dawned on me, especially if I was actually paying attention to this problem of like, okay, I might be on a spaceship. What can I do that might contribute information to answering that question? One of the obvious things would be to check if I could detect spin gravity.
I would also look for if the gravity is the same, the strength of the gravity is the same as it on Earth. Because I mean, no matter how big the ship is, like unless they have really ways to manipulate the strength of the gravity formed, you would have to have gravities like the strength the same as the 10 meters squared 10 meters per second squared, so equivalent of that on the ship, because then you would feel either lighter, much lighter than you would feel on Earth, and things like that. Maybe water balance, I don't know, like the level or something, like things like that. I would say would be good indications of there's something off. Well, I wonder what other things we could actually look into to feel like if we are on a spaceship or not.
I mean, there's not that much you can like check easily. I mean, it's kind of one of the things with relativity, right? Is you can't tell how fast you're going for the most part without some frame of reference. It's it's a tricky thing. Like if you're in a box, how do you figure out some of this stuff?
Especially with the artificial light and everything, you can't see this. I mean, like if you could see this, this into space, that would be probably the best indication. But unless they do something like this, that when it gets dark, right, when the nighttime comes, the stars on the sky are sort of mimicking what the sky sort of is outside the ship. And for example, if you see some of the stars moving faster than they should, maybe.
But I mean, there's not that much you can check as easily as you could a Coriolis effect, right? Because I mean, if you want to do something with like light or electromagnetism, you might need some either magnetic field strength detector or like a radiation detector or something to look for different.
I mean, you couldn't.
Like solar radiation stuff.
You have to have like maybe try to make a small compass, like like those.
Oh yeah.
A ball, a bit of like something like a leaf, and then a bit of I don't know, bit of magnetic material that can you can a needle something magnetize, and then try to see where the north is. If it actually even shows the north, or it's just gonna rotate like crazy. But you'd have to have something to magnetize that little needle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose that would tell you if there was no directional magnetic field, I suppose that might tell you something. But then again, you also have the uncertainty if you've been like in suspended animation for an unknown period of time, and there's been like a cataclysmic event on Earth, so the magnetic field could be screwed up anyway. I mean, that happens sometimes, right? You get inversions in the pole.
Yeah, but it still would point, like the needle would point like at the direction, right? You would have a north and south.
Not necessarily. Because sometimes, I mean, there have been occasions when the field's been like sufficiently weird that you wouldn't get a clear north or south point from a compass.
Okay.
But yeah, so I mean, you could say that there isn't an unusual Earth magnetic field, I suppose, if it wasn't pointing in a specific direction. But that wouldn't necessarily tell you that much, I suppose. But I mean, you could just be on the poles.
Yeah, but if we had enough sort of like the Coriolis effect, and then the little compass, and I mean, there are a few things that they all added up. Maybe I don't know. It'd be interesting to find it yourself in such environment and trying to figure out what is really happening. Because I mean, if the sky above you, like for example, it's just dark and there's nothing on it, then it's like, oh, okay. If there's some stars in there, like, can you even can you identify the most common ones, like I think the north, like in the north, the Great the Ursula Major, is that Ursula? What's the thing?
Ursa Major, yeah, it's
and
one of the constellations.
And then in the south is like I think the Great Cross, if I remember correctly, the stars, like things like this, right? If you had the knowledge, right? I'm sure out of the 40
you'd
people,
have to know a little astronomy.
If you out of the 40 people out there, I'm sure somebody would know a bit about this, right? And they combined, they could sort of figure it out, right? If you see more stars, if they're moving too fast, okay, there's something wrong. If they're not moving at all, right? Like there's no change in the sky at all, like that's also a bit indication, right? It's
and actually you could also try and, if you had or you could make a spectrograph, you could check for the spectral lines from the light from the stars, see if you're actually getting what looks like.
How would you go about doing that, though?
Yeah, I mean, actually making something that would have like a narrow enough split to do that would be tricky. Because you need like I can't remember how big the slot exactly is, but you need a very precisely sized narrow gap to
split the light. Yeah, this is the thing. Like you'd have to. I mean, Joseph in there was an engineer, so I guess it would maybe he would know exactly the dimensions of such thing. But like, if you find yourself in a jungle or in a spaceship and you have to survive and you've seen aliens, I think that'll be the last thing to think about, like trying to check the spectral lines of the stars if the light is actually matching what And also you'd have to remember like what the spectral lines are, for example, for hydrogen or something, like for.
Yeah, exactly. That's although I think those are relatively distinctive. There's kind of like this little two bands in the.
If you check, like, I mean, if we check afterwards, it'd be easy to remember, right? But like on the spot, I think it'll be hard to remember the stuff.
It's tricky. But I think that's kind of why I went to the Coriolis one as an obvious one, because it's a relatively straightforward thing to check, right? If you can just set up some water flowing smoothly and straight down, you can check if that's deviating from a straight line.
You know what?
With like a pouring water in a piece of string.
You know what'll be also a good try, right? checking the curvature, because
Of the horizon.
Because one, of the horizon, and two, you could also do the experiment where often flat earthers deny, but they're too stupid to actually accept what they're seeing, is that when you have a light and at certain distance, you have to lift your hands up with the light to actually see the light, because the curvature of the planet requires you to move it, I think, like a meter and a bit, because you will like, you have slots, right? Like you make little slots, like wooden, let's say, holes, and you shine the light through it, and at some point you actually have to like lift the light up to actually, to make the straight line. Otherwise, the curvature of the earth stops it to
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose that's quite tricky with whatever the local topography is, and you need a long enough distance to do it
I
well.
think you have to have, I don't remember the details, but I think a kilometer, if you were really, really bound on trying to test this, I think a kilometer is enough. I think. I'll have to check the details, but I think that'd be enough for you to sort of prove that if the curvature is not like the distance, like you have to measure, right? That would tell you perfectly if you're still on Earth or not. Because the curvature would have to be really matching the planets.
I don't know if you would, but presumably the ground level would be relevant to this measurement, right? You need quite precise information about elevation in order to do that accurately, right?
I'll have to check the exact details. I think it would affect it, of course, because if you're on a hill, and that would also affect. But I think if you have enough ground, like flat ground, that should be enough for you to be able to determine this. So I think we came up with a few good ideas here to
there's a few methods. Yeah.
So if anybody listening to us, if you ever get stuck in a spaceship, there you go. You know now how to test this stuff.
A few things to try.
Yeah, a few things to try. I mean, except for the aliens, talking to you, like, I think that should be a good enough reason. But in case you're still skeptical,
the presence of the aliens is, bit of a giveaway.
Yeah. So let's go back from that massive tangent.
Although I think a useful one.
I think it's probably like really useful one and spot one, yeah. So where were we? We were talking about like Curt not responding to her at all after she warned him not to behave like Peter. And this is where worried Lilith tells Nikanj to put him back to sleep and not to give him any weapons, because he will either hurt himself or someone. But Nikanj responds that Yahjai,
I think
maybe Kurt's Uloi thinks he'll be alright. On the other hand, Lilith says that as if it what does Peter Ulloy's thing, and it says it never told anyone what it thought. As a result, no one realized it was in trouble. Incredible behavior. I said it would be better if we weren't so drawn to you. So it seems that the whole incident with Peter was also because the Ulloy was so infatuated with it. It's just like it didn't say anything to the other Oankali.
Sharing what it was experiencing with the other Ulloy.
Yeah.
To get a clue that there might be a source of trouble. Yeah.
So, and the conversation continues on with Lilith thinking that the Oankali are deluding themselves about Curt, but Nikanj says that Celine will help Curt go through the dangerous time he's going through now. Like, I mean, come on, Celine. I mean, Nikanj says that she's stronger than Curt thinks she is. I don't think so. She's just like a little... I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I could certainly see her being more resilient than Curt thinks she is, because that would seem to fit with what we know. She
survived so long, so... But,
but,
who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe she's strong enough. But, like, the fact that Lilith matched them together was much better compared to Peter and Jean. But to which Lilith responds, like fire and gasoline, basically. And I just had this question here, like, Did the Oankali know what gasoline is? Like, do they use even the equivalent of fossil fuels?
I mean, probably not for like multiple millennia, if not considerably longer.
Yeah, I mean, like they probably
on the order
know
of billions of
again
years.
because of the humans who are using fossil fuels. But like before that, would they know what it is? Like,
yeah. I mean, yeah, they've got the records. They've done their reading.
I guess maybe. I just thought it was an interesting like thing to say, and this question immediately popped into my head.
Yeah, it's one of those like idiomatic phrases that doesn't necessarily translate well in another language.
I think like fire and fire and gasoline, because it makes sense because it just feels it. But yeah. Anyway, and this is where Gabriel comes in, like the saying that they won't be all right, and this is like I think the biggest premonition of this whole chapter, like this whole book, right? What's gonna happen, and this is the direct quote from the book. Look at things from Curt's point of view, Gabriel said. He's not in control even of what his own body does and feels. He's taking like a woman and... No, don't explain. He held up his hand to stop her from interrupting. He knows the Uloi aren't male. He knows all the sex that goes on is in his head. It doesn't matter. It doesn't fucking matter. Someone else is pushing all his buttons. He can't let them get away with that. Honestly frightened, Lilith asks, how have you made your peace with it? Who says I have? She stared at him. Gabe, we can't lose you too. And then Gabriel proceeds to tell her that he won't know until he knows where he is. Like, he know how he feels about until he knows whether it's an alien ship or Earth. And the chapter ends basically with a warning from Gabriel and response from Lilith that he shouldn't put Tate in a position where another guy will be given to her as a mate. You know, like that's the same situation with Jean, where basically she's being given another person, like wiped her memory. So I think what Gabriel said is very on spot. And I think it's not only what he feels, but also what Gabriel feels, right? They basically... this whole interaction with the alien is basically like, you know, those caricatures of aliens basically kidnapping people and anal probing them. Like that basically it feels that they are being raped, and it doesn't matter if it all happens in his head. It all happens against sort of his will in a way.
Yeah, it's still perceived as a violation, which it is. Yeah.
And this, I think... This is the reason why Curt will go insane. By the time when they escape, because at some point they're gonna break away from the whole group and they're just trying to travel away, they will find that they cannot escape, and that will be like the tipping point of the domino effect. It's gonna be a domino effect basically.
Yeah, he can't handle it. He's got to do something. He can't sort of take all this lying down.
His psyche will just break, and then basically it'll be like you'll hear the glass shattering basically. So I think this whole conversation, you know, like he's not in control even of what his own body does and feels. He's taking like a woman, and it you know, like basically Gabriel described what in many situations like a lot of women feel, you know, it's during wars, like when they're like, you know, violated. That's basically what it is. It's just a violation of the basic human rights in a way that it doesn't even it may feel great because we know that, you know, Joseph said it was like a drug. If you could bottle up, it will be like a drug. But it's against them. And let's be honest, it's 1950s Americans. Well, sexism and racism wasn't on this greatest point, you know, well, maybe not the greatest point, but like it was really, you know. So I
can definitely see why this is going to be a problem.
Especially, you know, like just imagine, I mean, in general, like for men, right, this whole situation, like being violated like that, is a massive stigma anyway. I mean, for everyone, but like for a male perspective, in the perspective where it's still in society, men have to be like the sort of strong, support, like manly, right? And
it's kind of more inconsistent with the role assigned by the societal norms.
But especially the 1950s men, when any sort of behavior, like if it was a bit of feminine and they were like basically called a woman, right, for that sort of situation, like that time, be like a social situation, it was, for some men, it was absolutely unacceptable. So I can feel that this whole idea, because I feel like this whole idea, I mean, we need to remember that this was written in the times where, a lot of things were still very, very embedded in the society, especially in American society. It will push him hard. It's pushing him hard to the tipping point.
Oh yeah, and I think, it's not an unreasonable thing to push you beyond your breaking point, right? It's something that it makes sense that would push you, but it also makes sense specifically that his character, his perception would respond particularly badly.
Oh yeah,
to this.
especially especially his character as well. Yeah. No, I just feel like this is one thing that the big problem the Oankali don't understand. This whole concept that whatever, like they're so attracted to it, and they kind of said that if it would be better if they weren't so attracted to humans. And this idea, I think, is what makes them blind to see there's a lot of things they don't understand about human culture. Because, as many humans survived from, the cataclysm, a lot of them are only just a small part of, like, you only get probably few humans per society, right? In some societies are probably completely gone now. Some have survived, but basically those are only like small parts of the remainings of the culture, right? I have different view on, let's say, British culture to you, Richard. And if we are the only, survivors of that culture, it'll be very skewed.
Oh yeah. So any individual's perspective on their broader culture would only be a snapshot of the whole.
Exactly.
Right?
So whatever the Oankali have learned would not be sufficient to understand the small intricate little small details,
and especially
of it.
Things like the sexual mores of a population and a culture would be something that, it's not necessarily something we write a lot about, or certainly we used to write less about it than we do now, even because it's kind of a taboo subject. So trying to pick up on the subtleties of that, especially from an alien perspective that has a very different attitude towards this stuff, it would be very difficult to bridge that gap.
Absolutely. Sexuality in general is such a difficult topic, not even talking about like personal sexuality. It's just like even looking at what do we find attractive, right? And what you think is attractive is completely different to what I think is attractive, for example. Or we can have some similarities, but it doesn't mean anything, because you find someone else and their view on attractiveness is completely different, right? So, and if like an octopus looking alien, right, that we know it's like a third male, it's a third, gender, but like it makes no sense in our minds because we are binary, right? We have
mostly, we have a few intersex.
But that comes down to the fact from the purely biological perspective, right? 99% of the population is binary, and that comes to the fact because that's the way we evolved. Except for that, there's some social, there's problems, the issues associated with like society, mental, it's all very like very complicated. But from the very biological, pure perspective, there's only two sexes on the planet, and imagine third, like especially from people.
We do have
from the perspective
like
from the people.
super biologically rare, like hermaphroditic.
No. But I know. But what I'm saying is that
I just like culturally, for the most part. Although there was I think in India, there was quite there was a particular culture in India that had quite a broad acceptance of like a third gender.
I mean, we've talked about this before. There's like another in some, I think, Hawaii, another like a third gender literally grown into the society. But that's not what I'm talking about. In here, it's more of like, especially from the perspective of those people who are like basically, collecting from 1950s or whatever, right? There's
so certainly from the cultural background of like, I don't know, 1950s kind of era America and so on. Anywhere that's come out of a kind of Western Christian tradition has that
exactly
sort of background of one man, one woman type attitude.
And the thing is, and often more not, like a perspective on a person who was not feeling the either man or a woman. Often they were like
disorienting.
Yes, and also they were mistreated, right? So for Kurt's perspective, I feel like his feeling is that he's basically it doesn't matter if it's like a third gender or sex, whatever word you want to use. He's being basically like taken like a woman, right? Like basically he is not treated as a man. A man should be taken, right? This is from his perspective, right? At the top, from his time.
Indeed.
So this is a problem still nowadays. Like basically, and a lot of people have this very strong identity of like, of how they feel about certain things, right? And so, and even like, and this is a big problem. And I think this is what really is the biggest pushing point for Kurt. And a lot of people, I think, in that group as well. That, like, for example, they have pet, right? They have pet. From a woman's perspective, right? They have already, met, their partners, right? That they try to survive with, right? And now there's a third alien coming through. Like, it also feels like a violation. It just feels violation for all of them. So, I just feel like this is a very, from Miss Octavia Butler, that this whole idea, like, it really, when you sit down and think about it from the perspective when it was written, from the perspective of the character's setup, from the perspective of nowadays, it's a topic that you can tell that a lot of people would not be fine with. And doesn't matter like it doesn't matter how tolerant you are or how acceptable of everything things. There are certain things that people, because the way they've grown up and the way their cultures and their backgrounds, it still feels like a violation no matter where you look at it.
Oh yeah, that's very much so. I mean that, like we're still very much in that cultural situation, right? We've not kind of grown beyond it now, and I think it's all complicated by the sort of coercive nature of the way that it's going on with the Oankali, right? Because they're insinuating themselves in here against the will of the other participants, so that complicates it because it's not if they were inviting the humans to participate in this rather than forcing it on them, then it would be
different. But you mentioned that
have a very different dynamic.
It would cause another stigma because those humans that actually allowed themselves in and they felt like, wow, this is amazing, and then those against that basically would call them basically dirty and like, I don't know, alien fuckers or whatever, right?
Yeah. It's a sort of sexual deviant thing where they'd be stigmatized and use that. We still have that, just like the adult entertainment industry, right? You go into the adult entertainment industry, it's very difficult to go into anything else.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of stigma associated with it.
And
a lot of if you work in that industry, you can't get banks and payment processing, and it's treated as kind of like close to criminal activity, even when it's not criminalized in certain places, right? So we have that persistent issue.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic. I think this book really touches on things that you may not think about until you actually sit down and discuss this with someone, or at least think about it and then have a conversation with someone.
Yeah. I think it's very good writing and deliberate. I think because it intends in having this third sex / third gender in the case of the Ooloid is kind of both of those things, because they have different social roles and different biology, and having the coercive element of that relationship and just all of those. It's an alien human thing, so it's a contamination stuff. It brings together all of these things that are just geared to kind of weird out the individuals in this scenario, right? It's sort of contrived to produce that kind of questioning, that kind of debate. It's a very good, as like I said, it's an excellent choice of properties to bring together to make this murky and difficult. Which is it's very well done. Not something you see explored that much
actually
in sci-fi. I mean, a few
interesting. I was just
things.
trying to think of just as you're talking, I was thinking what about Star Wars? I mean, in the movies you often see aliens mingling with each other, especially Twi'leks. Everybody's hot on Twi'leks, and it always feels to me is there no stigma against it? Do some of the species find them attractive, or is it just because we humans find them attractive because they look human? But the question is it really?
It's kind of an underexplored topic, right? That gets brought up just sort of in the background, but it doesn't. People don't
basically
get into
a fan service usually.
Nitty gritty. Yeah. I'm trying to think of other places where there's. I think in some of the follow-ups to Ringworld, there's a thing with a bunch of the Ringworld inhabitants crossbreeding.
Okay. It's really I think it's a difficult topic to explore from the sheer fact from that. One, it's difficult to write about it. I mean, you have to be good at writing stuff, first of all, because I feel like it would easily jump into sort of the 50 Shades of Grey sort of style thing that basically makes you a sexual deviant, basically, but at the same time, I mean, that's a bit extreme, because basically it's a book about sex, and that's the only reason why people read it. But the fact is that to discuss the problems that will arise from it, but those problems wouldn't be that difficult to explore, because I mean there's still a lot of stigma with people in societies, if they, for example, a Western people marrying or having children with people from Africa or from Asia, right, from Europe, America. It's just there's still some a lot of people who find it the whole purity thing, right? So the whole topic, the whole problems that are with that would still be translatable, right? But I feel like it'll be even more extreme in this fact.
Yeah, because it's even more alien to the culture, right?
So I feel like I mean, the way anyway, it would be basically like this times I don't know how much. I don't know. It just feels to me like this is it's a topic that should be more explored. A lot of it should be more discussed. A lot of things should be talked about from perspective of a lot of experts actually talking about, discussing, and coming to conclusions that basically benefit everyone, so that there is a proper conversation about it instead of stigmatizing it still. Or basically, if you're against this, if you're saying one thing, you're against that. If you're saying the other thing, you're against that. But you can't really find never middle ground, because everybody just feels that if you say one thing, it's their side. If you say the other thing, you're against them. It's just
Yeah, I think that's one of the advantages of exploring it in a medium like this, where it's
Yeah,
sci-fi,
absolutely.
right? You can kind of detach from the specifics. I think I said
Yes,
something
you said
similar
you have said
several
it before,
episodes
yeah.
back, right? Where you've got, you can have that kind of distance from it that it's hard to get when you talk about the specifics of it in a more real world context.
Yeah. So I think maybe it'd be a good point here to mention the next episode. So
Yes.
we had an idea to our next episode will be a bit special because we'll move away from the book and talk about the sort of this dystopian cyberpunk. And that's brought by because the fact is that recently Cyberpunk 2077 came out, and I think this whole idea of this dystopian, in my point of view, this dystopian, world where people modify themselves and the corporations rule the world is not that far in some countries, I would say. So I feel like this is pretty much where at the moment, from my perspective, the world is aiming towards. So I think it'd be very interesting to discuss not the game, because that's what we're not really doing, at least for now, but more of the history, the background of what cyberpunk is, and focus more on the science, what is possible, what is not possible.
Yeah, I suppose the tie-in here is that we have this world of biological modification, right? We have these aliens that are capable of doing bioengineering, and you kind of suggested this idea from cued by the launch of Cyberpunk 2077. It would be a good idea to discuss a little bit more about how close to some of these possibilities, either through the kind of genetic engineering side or the cybernetic enhancement type stuff that you see in this context, and kind of the sociological implications of that upcoming technological capability, what that is. So, I think next episode will feature some discussion of those things, and we'll like the plan at the moment, I think, is not to cover the next couple of chapters in that.
We'll try to. We need to prepare for this though, because this topic is very broad in a way. I think in Cyberpunk it's mostly about the cybernetic modifications, so we need to do some reading on that. But the fact is that there are some things like biohacking nowadays that happens. It's very primitive, but it's still something that it needs to be raised. And I feel like the whole idea of cyberpunk, like in general, is pretty fascinating because it's one of those sci-fi worlds that is quite. I think it's what we are aiming at, in a way.
Yes.
So
it's something that is like the sorts of technologies we see there are something that are probably fairly likely in the future timeline, like some of those things, some of those kind of cybernetic augmentations.
I don't think that we will reach that level by 2077 that is in the game, but I feel like we will be getting there quite fast. So I think
it's hard to say.
It's hard to say with the technology, but we often overestimate technology progress as well, as humanity as a whole. So
we usually both underestimate and overestimate it. Is that we think some things will go a lot further, but then we hit some limit condition, and we think nothing of other things, and they go a lot faster than expected.
So I think so the next episode will be a bit special, and I hope that everyone will forgive us that we'll move away from the book. But I think it's a quite fascinating topic, and maybe at some point we will discuss the game itself. But that would require, I don't know, probably 120 hours of our lives just dedicated to playing the game, and
I need a
new rig for that, and maybe Maya will handle it, but it just in general, it would take some time before we can even discuss this idea. But I think we probably would leave it for other people who are more already on board of reviewing the game. So we'll focus more on the science behind it and the history and the implications of that culture, I would say.
Yes. And one of the things I'll be bringing up, I think, is something that is not often talked about very much in the context of these things, which is the software that runs on all these devices.
That is a great idea.
In your body.
That is great.
Because, yeah, like, if you're not aware of how much of a shit show the Internet of Things is, from many perspectives,
you're on spot.
Once you've put that in your body, you like, if you haven't thought about it, follow along with us thinking about it, so you can be appropriately horrified.
Yes, I think it'll be great, sort of a wake-up call for people who think like Elon Musk, the whole neurochip in their brain. Like, you would want to wait with that.
Yeah. Do you really want Elon Musk to have access to your thoughts? Yeah,
exactly. So I hope everyone can wait until next episode about this, because there's gonna be a lot of things to discuss, and probably the episode is gonna be quite long.
Quite possibly.
So,
yeah, bit of a departure from our usual thing.
But I think it'll be quite worth doing it, because it's on topic, to be honest.
Yes, I think it's very relevant to the sorts of things that we discuss in the context of this book.
Yeah. So with that, I'm just gonna quickly go through my chapter 3 prediction and let's finish off. I just think that basically in chapter 3 we'll start seeing the training happening and the first humans starting to break away, like starting to try, having the tools. They will try to fight through the river and then try to
this time the rebellion will happen.
Time for the rebellion to take place.
Okay.
Right then, everyone, thank you very much for listening. We were Xenothesis. You can find all our previous episodes on xenothesis.com, and also all other places where we actually upload those episodes are all there. I was Michael Glinka.
I was Richard Acton.
Bye.
Goodbye.